Hello everyone, I wish you a healthy day. Here are the main contents of the video. A terrifying geopolitical turning point. The United States has officially declared its intention to seize and monopolize Iran's oil and gas resources. Donald Trump has issued a shocking executive order. Beyond airstrikes, the U.S. military will seize Kharg Island, taking control of 90% of this country's financial lifelines. This unprecedented, ruthless, and thorough move will completely choke off Tehran's daily $500 million cash flow. Breaking, a U.S. Apache helicopter was shot down over the Strait of Hormuz, leading to a confrontation involving top-secret technology. The deadly and decisive attack by the Shahed suicide drone has shattered the pride of the U.S. Air Force in the Gulf. It triggered a tense rescue operation using ocean robots. However, the real horror lies in the shadow of secret shipments that were just smuggled into Iran before the F-Lo war. The Pentagon had to deploy massive F-15 E-strike aircraft and F-35 stealth fighters into a life-or-death decisive battle, a catastrophic and deadly strike. 90% of Iran's missile capabilities were wiped out, and blatant lies spread like never before among the ashes. The rain of fire from the devastating Tomahawk missile barrages turned all of Iran's radar networks and air defense positions into ashes. The entire dictatorship in Tehran was in its final death throes as its strategic missile stockpiles were almost completely wiped out. Here is the detailed content and analysis of the Great War in the Strait of Hormuz, where the U.S. unleashed a rain of fire and wiped out 90 of Iran's missile depots. Ladies and gentlemen, the skies over the Middle East are blazing with an overwhelming air campaign, marking a brutal turning point in the strategic confrontation between Washington and Tehran. From the turbulent seas, the U.S. Navy's guided missile destroyer, USS Michael Murphy, changed course to catch the wind, continuously launching salvos of Tomahawk cruise missiles from its vertical launch system. A total of 49 missiles tore through the night. The sky lit up with streaks of light heading straight for strategic targets deep inside Iranian territory. Military analysts believe this is a powerful strike with absolute precision, completely destroying old radar stations, communications centers, air defense positions, and the Supreme Command headquarters of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC. Not stopping there, the U.S. Central Command CENTCOM also released images of F-16CC and F-16CZ Wild Weasel fighter jets. The crews of the defense systems are carrying out jamming and destroying the enemy's communication hubs and early warning radar networks. This rain of fire is not only limited to the coastal region, but has expanded nationwide. It stretches from the coastline deep into the interior of Iran, covering strategic areas such as Karzai and Nazarbath in the southeast of Tehran, all the way to the vital region of Bandar Abbas and Qasim Island, right at the Strait of Hormuz. All of them are shaken by the pinpoint explosions of American precision weapons. This is the second consecutive night that Iran's military map has been scarred by heavy airstrikes, and the final rounds only stopped as the first light of dawn appeared. The battlefield situation is being brutally reshaped as Tehran's resistance is gradually worn down. The intensity of the conflict is expected to escalate to a new and terrifying level, following a shocking and groundbreaking announcement from President Donald Trump on social media, causing a stir. He affirmed that the U.S. military would deliver further lightning strikes against Iran as the naval forces, air force, armor, air defense, and most of the offensive power of this country have almost been wiped out. The key point in this strategic message is that the U.S. is preparing to take control of Kharg Island and vital oil and gas infrastructure in order to monopolize the management of Iran's oil and gas market, similar to the model that Washington has applied very effectively in Venezuela. Kharg Island, which used to handle up to 90% of Iran's crude oil exports before the fighting broke out, is now not only a bombing target, but is also becoming the focus of a comprehensive occupation campaign. This move aims to cut off financial resources entirely, depriving the Tehran regime of its last lifeline through the coordinated use of overwhelming air power, expeditionary marine units, and special operations forces. Facing the risk of total collapse, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard resisted with desperate efforts they called a response to the enemy's criminal acts. They launched drone squadrons targeting the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet base in Bahrain and the Ali al-Salem Air Base in Kuwait. At the same time, a long-range missile was also launched directly at the Azraq Air Base in Jordan, where the U.S.'s advanced F-35 fighter jets are stationed. They continuously issued warnings about even harsher retaliatory strikes if the U.S. does not stop. At the same time, they unilaterally declared that the Strait of Hormuz had been permanently blocked. However, CENTCOM immediately refuted this information with concrete evidence, confirming that hundreds of ships are still freely passing through this vital maritime route. The gap between bold statements and actual combat capabilities is becoming increasingly apparent as Iran's defense potential is rapidly declining. Iran's deadlock stems from a distorted power structure within the country, where high-ranking political leaders such as President Massoud, Masha Tzezekian, or Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, those who appear to be pro-Western, are actually just puppets manipulated by the IRGC hardliner faction. They are completely powerless in seeking a realistic peace agreement because every decision must go through hot-headed figures like Air Force Commander Hamid Vahedi or IRGC Commander-in-Chief Hossein Salami. In their final desperate struggle, with no other option but to hopelessly launch ballistic missiles at America's allied countries in the region, Iran is pushing itself toward the brink of destruction. The battlefield will flare up again as U.S. Secretary of Defense Peter Hessel has issued a warning, implying that Washington will have an extremely busy night, leaving a lonely Tehran in the ashes of war. From the peaceful land of Arizona, it is hard to imagine a violent storm raging so fiercely in the Middle East, where a series of rapid events has pushed the entire region into a full-blown crisis. The source of this escalating tension began when a U.S. Army AH-64 Apache attack helicopter was suddenly shot down over the strategic Strait of Hormuz by Iranian-made Sayyid unmanned aerial vehicles. According to reliable intelligence sources, this Iranian suicide UAV flew directly into the Apache but did not detonate immediately. A rare stroke of luck allowed the crew to make an emergency landing on the sea. Washington immediately condemned Iran's attack as a brutal act targeting American forces, because the Sayyid UAV's impact could have easily taken the lives of the two pilots on board. Although Tehran continuously denied it and considered it a fabricated excuse to start a war, the wheels of history had already turned and could not be reversed. The first night of the retaliation campaign began with thunderous strikes from the combat squadrons of the U.S. Air Force and Navy. Ultra-precise guided weapons rained down on a series of air defense positions, ground control stations, and Iran's network of early warning radar along the Strait of Hormuz, causing secondary explosions that echoed across the entire sky. The U.S. Central Command affirmed that this was a proportional and resolute response to the series of provocative acts targeting U.S. forces as well as international commercial vessels passing through the region's vital sea lanes. In a desperate effort to save face, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard launched counterattacks using two familiar methods. They claimed to have launched attacks on 18 U.S. military targets spread across strategic air bases, including Ali al-Saland and Al-Vermet al-Sabr in Kuwait, as well as the Said Sakisa Air Base in Bahrain. Simultaneously, Iran's suicide drone squadrons were deployed to the U.S. Navy 5th Fleet headquarters area. Although there were some videos recording violent explosions near the garrison area of the 5th Fleet, information about the headquarters of this fleet being hit has not yet been verified. Tehran even boasted about shooting down or destroying an F-35 stealth fighter right in the rescue zone. Iran is using all its remaining strength in the fight, but up to 90% of its ballistic missiles have been destroyed. This severe loss is forcing them to ration weapons. They can only launch about 10 missiles in each round and have to space out the launches by several days in an effort to preserve the last remnants of their national missile program. The brutality of the blockade is further demonstrated by the tragic fate of the oil tanker MT Xavier. The ship was hit by two missiles that tore through the engine room after the crew ignored stern warnings from the patrol forces. The United States not only increased the frequency of targeted surgical airstrikes, but also systematically tightened the maritime blockade. The next strategic move, which is the plan to comprehensively take over Kakloy Island, will be a geopolitical turning point that poses a deadly threat to the regime in Tehran. As the war has entered a new phase, the battlefield situation is revealing the life and death calculations of both sides. Although the frequency and scale have clearly decreased compared to the initial phase, Iran still stubbornly takes advantage of the cover of night to launch drone squadrons and ballistic missiles. This is exactly Tehran's strategic scheme. They took full advantage of the previous ceasefire period to rebuild their forces. They relocated all remaining equipment into fortified underground bunkers to launch rapid salvos and then quickly hide. To counter this guerrilla tactic, the coalition strategists had no choice but to make the most advanced bunker-busting bombs the centerpiece of their operational plan. The ultimate goal is to neutralize Iran's critical domino pieces, including the vital Strait of Hormuz and the network of ballistic missile and drone depots deeply embedded underground. To break through this shield, the first step is to launch a campaign to suppress enemy air defenses, also known as the SEAD tactic. The responsibility of paving the way is assigned to the F-16 fighter jets nicknamed Wild Weasel. The mission of these aircraft is extremely dangerous, but also full of pride. They provoke and entice enemy air defense radars to activate their signals. Then immediately, the HARM anti-radiation missiles will follow those electronic waves and destroy the targets in the blink of an eye. Right after Iran's surveillance network is blinded, the giant doors open for the F-15 Strike Eagle attack fighters to take off. This legendary aircraft can carry an extremely large payload of precision weapons, from GBU-54 guided bombs to 2,000-pound heavy bombs capable of crushing underground fortifications. High above, the F-35 stealth fighters serve as advanced eyes, hunting and monitoring every counter move of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, ISGC. Coordinating smoothly with them are the F-18 squadrons, roaring off aircraft carriers to carry out swift surgical strikes. This combination is like an alliance of legendary warriors, but their weapons are not magic. They are laser-guided bombs accurate to the centimeter, carrying out a mission of punishment. The 2 nights of airstrikes so far are just the prelude to an even more terrifying firestorm about to be unleashed as the scale of the squadron. The next airstrike is expected to be one of the most intense campaigns in modern military history targeting Iran. To fight against fate, Iran will surely mobilize all its remaining resources to try to prevent disaster. They quietly upgraded their surface-to-air and shoulder-fired air defense missiles, including several man-pads during the ceasefire. Meanwhile, in the secret operations rooms of the Pentagon, American military leaders were not sitting idly by either. They carefully calculated every option to protect their pilots against advanced military technologies that might have been smuggled into Iran through 15 Chinese transport flights just before the fighting broke out. These shipments, which observers sarcastically referred to as cheap toys for the amusement of people like Tauba, Mortaba Kamen, or even cardboard boxes ready to hold the bodies of those in power, were in fact dangerous defense systems intended to shift the balance of power. In reality, at this time in Western Hejaz, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard had completely seized power and pushed the country onto a path of extreme confrontation with no way out. Their stance was clear and uncompromising, never yielding to the demands of the West. They arrogantly demanded that the U.S. pay war reparations, withdraw all troops from the Middle East, and recognize Iran's right to develop its nuclear program. These hardline leaders believed that the only way to ensure the regime's survival was to possess a massive arsenal of up to 5,000 to 10,000 ballistic missiles and thousands of UAVs to secure their nuclear sites. Their core objective was to force the U.S. to withdraw, creating a vacuum for them to restore their military capabilities and eventually acquire nuclear weapons to dominate and threaten the world. The extreme danger lies in the fact that the new class of supreme clerics, the Ayatollahs, are religious fanatics. They believe themselves to be the sole representatives of God on earth, and therefore any force that goes against their will is accused of opposing the Almighty, turning this geopolitical conflict into a tragic, fierce, and bloody chapter in human history. The regime in Tehran has long maintained its power through a brutal strategy, psychological manipulation, and ruthless, bloody repression of its own people. Shocking reports indicate that the number of civilians killed in recent months could range from 5,000 up to as many as 40,000 people. No matter the exact number, it is a humanitarian tragedy that exposes the true nature of a dictatorship that rules by the philosophy of shooting first and asking questions later, showing no mercy and no doubt. This is the brutal entity the U.S. government is being forced to negotiate with diplomatically. Geopolitical observers all understand that negotiating with organizations that hold terrorist ideologies is an impossible task without military power as a foundation. The scenario always repeats itself, ironically, when they are invited to the negotiating table. They seem to agree, but then immediately go back on their word. For such an opponent, the only language that carries weight is firepower. Washington, Washington has played a diplomatic card, giving Tehran an opportunity to ease tensions. But once the response is only arrogant rejection, the overwhelming power of the coalition will crush all resistance. The relentless airstrikes by the U.S. are a cold reality check for Tehran, proving that Washington will not tolerate such illusions. In particular, The plan to capture Karg Island will completely break Iran's ability to control the global energy market, creating a profound geopolitical turning point. This move will even pull European partners back into the orbit of the US. Previously, the United Kingdom and some European countries had secret agreements to benefit from a percentage of each barrel of Brent crude oil traded through the Strait of Hormuz. Once the United States gains full control over this oil and gas infrastructure, Europe will be forced to give up its long-standing interest to side with a solid allied coalition. The tragic situation of the war is pushing Iran's military leadership into such a desperate position that they have to resort to the most ridiculous lies to cover up their helplessness in front of the people. Imagine a scenario at the IRGC Air Traffic Control Center, where the officers are trying to broadcast a fake weather report, claiming that all flights are completely delayed due to extreme weather conditions. They try to convince the public that the thunderous roar of Tomahawk cruise missiles tearing through the sky is just the sound of thunder from storm clouds and advise people to wear raincoats if they need to go outside. At the same time, they desperately deny the obvious truth that hundreds of international ships are still freely passing through the Strait of Hormuz, despite Tehran's declaration of a permanent blockade. The height of irony is that Iran's entire strategic communication system, which was previously used to harass and threaten innocent ships, has now been reduced to ashes, and even they don't understand why it all exploded at once. So in your opinion, does the United States' comprehensive control of Karg Island and Iran's energy lifeline really strangle the country's economy? And why does the Tehran government deliberately distort the truth in the media to hide their helplessness from the people?